Every war counts its losses, but almost nobody counts the cost of what it won. And there's a rule so simple, it runs under almost every war ever fought. Take a city, and the city is yours. Take a port, and the port is yours. Take it. Own it. As basic as a rule gets. And for most of history, it just holds. Except one autumn, an army took one of the biggest harbours on Earth and couldn't use it for 85 days. The docks were fine. The cranes turned. The warehouses stood there, ready, waiting, and not one cargo ship could get in. And the strangest part is where the problem actually sat. Not in the docks, not in the city, it was out on a map. On a thin little line nobody bothered to look at twice. A river mouth, 80 kilometres of water, between the sea and the Keys. That was it. Almost an entire war resting on a stretch of water people kept forgetting to even mention. And the thing I can't get past? It wasn't hidden. It was right there, on every map they owned. They just didn't look at it. Not properly, not in time. This one's for the ones who stay. The noticers, something ordinary, except it never was. Okay, let me back up to the bit no one argues about. Because on paper, this starts as a very good day. Summer, 1944. The Allies break out of Normandy and they move. Fast. Some days 60 miles. Whole towns liberated before lunch. And the feeling, everywhere, is that the war might just tip over by Christmas. But there's a quiet catch, buried in all that speed. Every bullet, every drop of fuel, still had to come all the way from the beaches back in Normandy. By truck, because the French railways had been bombed flat. So the further the armies ran, the longer the string got behind them. Thinner, more stretched, till, by early September, it just ran out. The advance stopped. Not beaten, not pushed back, just starved. And that's the thing people forget about a war this size. It doesn't only run on courage, or ground taken. It runs on tonnage, on fuel and bullets and food arriving every single day. An army that can't be fed, can't move. Full stop. So what they needed, more than another mile of map, was one big working harbour, close to the front. And there was one, sitting right there. The second biggest in all of Europe, Antwerp. So, the 4th of September, British tanks roll into the city, and they find something they genuinely did not expect. The wreckage they'd braced for isn't there. Normally, a retreating army wrecks a port on the way out, blows the cranes, sinks ships in the channel, burns the warehouses. It's standard. But the Germans had been pulling back in such chaos that nobody had the time or the orders to do it. And the Belgian resistance had got into the docks first and kept the place from being destroyed. So the cranes are intact, the quays work, the warehouses are full and standing. The single most important harbour on the entire front, handed over, almost whole. And on paper, that's the supply crisis solved. In a day, 40,000 tons a day this place could move. And to put that in some kind of scale, the little makeshift harbour they'd been leaning on all summer managed under 7,000. So Antwerp wasn't a bit better. Oh, it was a different order of thing entirely. This was the tap the war had been waiting to turn on. And everyone could feel it. The problems cracked. Supplies solved. The war might really, actually end this year. That was the mood. Genuine relief. And that's usually the exact moment in a story like this where the floor gives way. Because one man looked at the same map everyone was celebrating and asked the question nobody around him was asking. How do the ships actually get in? And it sounds almost too simple. But sit with it a second. Antwerp isn't on the sea. It sits 80 kilometres inland, up a river. Which means the only way a ship reaches those famous quays, the only way a single ton of that cargo ever lands, is up one long, narrow throat of water, the Scheldt. And the Scheldt was still German. Every mile of it. Both banks. So the harbour was Allied, but the road to it wasn't. Owning the place and being able to reach it
turned out to be two completely separate things. And the man pointing at this was the Navy's man, Ramsay. He'd put the warning up the chain more than once in plain words: clear the approaches first, or the port is worth nothing. Another admiral said it even flatter, said Antwerp, until that water was cleared, would be about as much use as somewhere 1,000 miles inland. And what makes it land harder is this: it wasn't a hunch.
The intelligence was already saying, in writing, that the enemy meant to hold that estuary at any cost. So the warning was on the table, backed up. It just wasn't the loudest thing on the table. And that's what quietly decides everything. Not that nobody knew, that somebody knew. And it lost, because there was a bolder plan in the room. A single hard thrust north over the Rhine. A gamble to end the whole war in one stroke. And a plan like that needs everything. The men, the aircraft, the attention. So the estuary, that slow, muddy, unglamorous river-clearing job, it could wait. Just a little. Could it, though? Because in that little pause, the enemy did not wait. A whole German army, one that should have been trapped with its back to the sea, used the gap, slipped away along the estuary, and dug in, hard, on both banks of the exact water the ships would need. So the delay didn't just cost time, it handed the other side the time. Let them turn a lightly held estuary into a fortress. And there's one moment in here I genuinely can't walk past. One British commander admitted later that he still had a full day's supplies in hand. Right then. But he could have pushed another 18 miles and slammed the enemy's escape route shut, and didn't. And I stop dead on that every time. Because it's not a lack of men, or fuel, or a map that failed him. Everything he needed was right there, in his hands. The window was open, wide open, and it closed. Now, I want to be fair here, because it's so easy to flatten this into one man's blunder, one villain. And it wasn't that. The bolder gamble was approved further up the chain too. It wasn't one signature, and the commander most blamed for it afterward, in writing, actually owned it. Called it a bad mistake on his part. Said he'd underestimated the whole thing completely, and that lands heavier than a villain ever could. Because it isn't malice, it's just a serious, human misjudgment, made at the single worst moment to make one. So the job that could have been quick became one of the worst of the entire war. Once they finally turned to face it, the estuary had to be taken the hard way. Bank by bank, island by island, and the ground itself had turned against them. Because the Germans had opened the dikes and let the sea back in, flooding the low, flat country on purpose. So men were fighting across open, waterlogged fields, in freezing mud, with almost nowhere on earth to take cover. 5 weeks of that. Mostly Canadian soldiers, with British and Polish troops alongside them. And the bill, just to clear that one stretch of water, came to nearly 21,000 Allied casualties, around 6,000 of them Canadian. 21,000. To open the door to a harbour that had been sitting there, already taken, since the 4th of September. And that number is easy to just slide past, but every one of those men was paying, in the freezing autumn, for a door that had been left unlocked and unopened, back in the warm, easy summer. Taking the port cost almost nothing. The way in cost nearly everything. And the gap between those two is the whole story. And the part that really stays with me, even beating the enemy wasn't the end of it. The Germans were finally cleared off the banks, and there was still one more thing sitting in the way. The water itself was full of mines. So for another 3 weeks, minesweepers crawled up that river, pulling them out one at a time. Over 260 of them. Winning the ground didn't open the harbour. It stayed shut until the water was safe. And then, finally, the 28th of November, the first heavy cargo ship came up the Scheldt and into Antwerp. One ship. A freighter called the Fort Cataraqui. 85 days after the city had fallen, the port actually opened. And once it did, it poured. 22,000 tons a day, flooding into the front. Everything the war had been starving for all autumn. Though even then the city got no peace.
because now the rockets started coming down out of the sky, aimed at the very harbour they'd just bled for weeks to open. Winning it, it turned out, wasn't even the same as being safe inside it. The prize kept costing, long after it was won. So, back to that simple rule. We took the port. That's how it gets said. We took Antwerp. And it's the kind of clean, proud sentence a whole campaign can stand inside and mean it. But it's the water just outside that sentence I can't stop turning over. Because the thing that actually decided all of it wasn't the great harbour at all. It was the thin line beside it, the part of the map nobody wanted to look at. Everyone had their eyes locked on the prize, the docks, the cranes, the trophy for the photograph, and all along, the thing quietly running the war was that stretch of water leading up to it. The Scheldt, the part with no glory in it at all. The harbour fell in a single day. The way to the harbour took nearly 3 months, and 21,000 men. So the city was theirs the whole time.
They'd taken it. They held it. They never lost it. They just couldn't reach it. From the one direction that mattered, the sea. And for 85 days, holding Antwerp and being able to use Antwerp turned out to be nowhere near the same thing. And I'm honestly not sure the word we reach for even fits anymore. Whether an army ever truly owns a thing like that, or whether a thing like that quietly owns the army the moment it forgets to ask how it's even going to reach it. Because having something, and being able to use it, those were never, once, the same thing.